How is everybody? Oh,
I forgot to do it earlier.
now the pressure is really on me. Any mistake I made is permanent. Hi, everybody. Again, Senator Roberts regrets that he wasn't able to be here tonight. We have a few bills. I actually would like to talk about 3 bills. I know that the number was a pair, but especially pairing off the heels of what's on the front of everybody's mind, the Ukraine crisis. We do have a bill related to that as well, that people could potentially support, so we could garner more support here in the state itself. But again, Senator Roberts regrets he can't be here. He's actually on active duty. He's in Alabama this week, working on some JAG Corps related things, because he's now a captain in the Air Force Reserve as a JAG. So first, I want to touch on Senate Bill 1233. On the heels of our discussion about Ukraine. That is our Refugee Resource Center bill. This was filed last week, not at the end of session, not at the end of filing, because it was not our priority. It was actually one of our primary priorities from the very beginning, but we were trying to get it exactly right before we filed it. So the Refugee Resource Center bill would actually establish a statewide tax credit to encourage Missourians and businesses within Missouri to contribute to the already robust existing nonprofit network. So sadly, a lot of almost entirely refugees are handled not with any kind of aid from the state. The way the process works is the federal government essentially, sometimes even a matter of hours before people arrive in the state, the federal government calls the Department of Social Services in the state of Missouri, and then the Department of Social Services disseminates that information as to, okay, there is a family of Afghan refugees arriving at Lambert International Airport today at 3 o'clock. We need somebody there. So in St. Louis, you've probably heard about like the International Center. They're the biggest name. They handle, they're kind of the biggest choke point. They handle a lot of people. So DSS will get a call from the federal government that says we're going to have people there, and maybe even in a matter of hours, and then DSS has to disseminate that information down. So in St. Louis and across the state, because we have a lack of funding at a statewide level for the Department of Social Services and for a lot of these programs, the onus falls on these nonprofits. So we built the Refugee Resource Center bill, that's Senate Bill 1233. It would have a $10 million statewide cap on the tax credits. That way we're not eating too much into our already limited kind of general revenue. And it would have a 50% on the dollar credit per person, capped at $10,000 per year. So if you contributed $20,000 to, say, the International Center, you would get a $10,000 tax credit back on your income for your statewide income. Our primary focus tonight that I wanted to talk about was Senate Bill 1151. That's what we've coined the Faith Without Fear Act. So Senator Roberts was inspired after the most recent synagogue hostage crisis in Texas to utilize kind of the framework of some other bills that we've seen in the legislature, in particular one that was actually focused on cybersecurity, to actually construct a bill that was focused on physical security for across denominations, religious organizations. I know that under the Trump administration, the Department of Homeland Security listed domestic terrorism as the #1 threat to us here domestically. And a lot of that centers around religion, whether it's Christianity. If you look at, I forgot his name, Dylan Roof, or whether it's the synagogue hostage crisis or the repeated attacks across the board. We need to provide some assistance there. So under this bill, the Department of Public Safety would distribute $25 million over the course of 10 years for improvements to physical security. And the way we have to structure it is for non-for-profit organizations. So other non-for-profits would be eligible, but obviously the core focus is these religious institutions. It would provide that those non-for-profits receive the grant for up to 75% of the total cost. So we want to make sure that organizations are somewhat involved in the process up to roughly 25%. And it would be about $50,000, but that's per year. So an organization could get a $500,000 grant disseminated across 10 years. That alone pays for a security guard if they're paying, you know, another $12,500 a year. So whether it's, you know, like an individual security system, whether it's improvements to actual infrastructure security, it would be entirely up to the Department of Public Safety how those grants would be distributed. And then finally, Senate Bill 1137. I know the broader discussion was about disadvantaged communities, and Senate Bill 1137 is one that we're really excited about. It's going to have probably a tough time getting anywhere this year, but it's actually, our hope is as it goes through Senator Schupp's Committee on Progress and Development, and 1137 would establish standards for employers regarding new hires and wage range disclosure. So following the lead of 6 or 7 other states at this point now, we've seen that, you know, in an effort to kind of close gender and race and religious and community related pay gaps that exist across the spectrum, one of the best tools to do that is to actually just make it so that employers, when they go and when they're in the process of hiring someone, disclose the actual salary range that they're interested in. Because the present conditions in the market in Missouri make it so that someone like me, a young person who's at the final stage of going through 4 and 5 interviews over the process of 3 to 4 months, I'm bidding against myself, right? So, you know, I've never, as of a couple of years ago, I had never applied for a job before. So at the end of the process, I'm hungry. Like I've had 30 different job applications that didn't go anywhere. And I'm saying, well, I don't want to ask for too much money because, you know, I don't know if that's going to eliminate me from contention, right? So employers benefit off that in a way that unfairly discriminates against individuals who might be a first-time college graduate, or individuals who might not be from a community themselves, or specifically women. It actually has shown over time that does discriminate against women who might be less forceful through a course of negotiations than maybe an arrogant young man like myself. So that is kind of our idea there, is to actually make it so that that imperfect information problem and that bidding against yourself problem is reduced and maybe even eliminated. So in that bill, employers would be required after going through a full interview process, in-person interview, to release, okay, we're looking to hire someone between the range of $60,000 to $90,000, if that was their range, or it would be upon request of the individual. And then there's some different rules if you're an employee within an organization and you're applying for a different role within said organization, but it would be functionally about the same. So that's kind of the 3 bills that I wanted to discuss today. We've got some others that are focused on, you know, equitable growth and education, but those are probably the 3 that I thought might be the most interesting today.
Great, thank you. We do have just a minute or 2 if anyone has any questions at this point. And Cheryl, if you can help me identify if anyone has a question in the chat or their hand is up.
Sure, I'm looking. Go ahead and put it in the chat or raise your hand if you have a question for Senator Roberts. We have everybody here. Come on, guys. I know someone's got a question.
They'll probably think of it by the time we come back together. So hopefully, Michael, you might be available still to join us at the end. Or we can
I would add the best way, because I know the question was posed. So what's the best way to potentially support these legislation?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the first step that can always be taken is to contact our office directly. We have, if you just go to senate.mo.gov or house.mo.gov, there is, you know, you can go directly to a legislator's page and there's a link to send them an email or even give our office a call. So by reaching out to us and letting us know you support things, especially by email, you know, we can provide that to other committee members. The next step, kind of if you want to go a step bigger, is to support it, you know, within your own community, share it with people, because that's a huge issue, is just people understanding what the issues are. And then the step beyond that is probably sharing it, like if you are the head of an organization or if you're a part of a larger organization, share it with said organization so that way that works through. You know, a big issue we run into on the Democrat side, and I actually had this exact issue today when it came to pitching our Refugee Resource Center bill to a member of the other side of the aisle, is, you know, I go in there, the chief of staff for, I've got my hat on that says I'm the chief of staff for the Democrat, and they're immediately skeptical, even though the Refugee Resource Center bill would provide tax credits to employers and individuals who are already going to be donating, who like might want to reduce their income tax burden, and something that it's just something that very typically would be supported by the other side if they had the idea. And so, you know, the biggest thing is typically actually communicating with them, like, you know, hey, this is not necessarily a partisan issue. Like this is a human issue. Like this is a way to support those things. And I actually am about to go drop off a letter as well that we appropriate about $10 million this year to grants, which would fund refugee centers. That's another avenue. So it's mostly just communication and direct communication with those legislators. And I see a hand.
Hey, Lynn, do you have a question?
Oh, I
You have
think
to
you're
unmute,
muted.
Lynn, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, here I am. Of the three that you've talked about, which do you feel is the most important? Or am I okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine. I don't know if I can speak for the center on which he might find most important. I know that he hounded me the most to get Faith Without Fear done. So I can tell you that. And if I think an easier question would be which one might be the most likely for us to be able to pass.
Okay, that's good.
That's one that I can answer. And just given the present environment at the state capitol, I would say that 1151 Faith Without Fear is one that would be the most likely to pass. 1137, establishing a requirement for employers to, you know, kind of eliminate their leg up on their potential employees and reduce people's salaries. That's going to be the toughest. The Refugee Resource Center is a total wild card. I have no idea if we're going to be able to get the support. We were actually contacted by a very, very conservative friend of ours, our office from Southwest Missouri. And it was kind of his idea to structure it in that way because we structured it based on an existing credit that exists for pregnancy crisis resource centers, which is a very conservative issue. So, you know, I have no idea what's going to happen with that one. I would say Faith Without Fear, though, is the one we might have the best chance to get onto another bill. And anytime, you know, there are 10 Democrats in the Missouri Senate. And I know that this is a bipartisan meeting, but the reality is as the Democrat side, even when we have bills that are bipartisan support, we're not passing our original bill. Like we have to get it tacked on to someone else's bill as an amendment. And I think that one is the one that might have the most broad support when it goes to the floor. You know, we could put that to a vote and then really make it so that they would have to vote against funding something like that if they didn't want to support it. So that would be probably our best shot.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, Mike. We really appreciate you being here. I'm expecting, so I just heard that the legislative session has ended on the House side. So we should start getting our speakers in. And I see Representative Gunby's on the line, has joined us, now there's somebody that says 314-570-5387. And I don't know if that's a legislator. So if that's your phone number, would you let me know, please? If that's a legislator, and if not, we will go ahead and ask Representative Gunby to join us.
Sounds good, Cheryl. I'll go ahead and introduce Representative Trish Gunby, if we're ready. Is that
Oh, hold on one second. So I also
okay?
see that Adam Schwadron's on. Adam, I know you have a commitment in committee. Do you want to go now or do you want to come back? Okay, I'm not seeing Adam, so go ahead, Representative. Why don't you go ahead, Deborah? And thank you all
Okay,
for your
great.
patience. This is a moving target. This is a real forum happening real time.
Thank you, Cheryl. Representative Trish Gunby is a Democrat who represents a portion of St. Louis County that includes Manchester and Valley Park. She was first elected to the House in 2019. Her interest in elected office grew from her passion for social justice and her leadership experience at the Manchester United Methodist Church, where she focused on issues related to gun violence, hunger and poverty reduction, LGBTQ rights, mental health, and racial justice. We thank Representative Gunby for her support of voting rights and the citizen initiative process. She recently stood on the House floor and read the witness testimony of many volunteers who are working to save this process in our state. Welcome, Representative Trish Gunby.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being patient with us. We just got let loose. So with as much little damage, but you know, it is what it is. Stay tuned. But I'm happy to be here tonight. I know I was asked to talk about my priorities for me personally, and I'm happy to share that. I will tell you that as a Democrat in a majority, minority party in a majority Republican House, I have been very intentional about finding Republicans who will file my bills, because I know that's one of the few ways they can move through the process and get heard in committee. And so two that I have accomplished that with, one that I filed when I first was sworn in, it's a PTSD bill. And it was actually brought to me by one of my constituents, the mayor of Manchester, Missouri, Mike Clement. And it has to do with individuals who are diagnosed with PTSD if they find themselves in a housing situation where things do not work out well for them, that they can be let out of their lease without any financial consequences. And then the other bill that I see as being a bipartisan bill, I have a fentanyl testing strip bill that will hopefully cut down on those deaths for people who get fentanyl mixed in with their drugs. And what it is, it's a pilot program. And you would put a paper strip in your drug, and if it has fentanyl in it, it would indicate that to the user. And then hopefully they would make the decision to not take that drug. And so I have Representative Bob Bromley, who has filed my PTSD bill. He's out of the Joplin area. And Representative Shamed Dogan has filed my fentanyl testing bill, and he's out of the Baldwin area. So I'm very intentional about that, hopeful that when the speaker sees that it has bipartisan support, that it'll get heard in committee. I've also reached out to budget committee members in the hopes that, especially not so much with the PTSD one, but with the fentanyl testing strip bill, there is a fiscal note on it. So I want to get that included in the appropriations process. So as I said, as a Democrat, that's what you got to do. So those are my priorities in terms of my own personal legislation. I have 16 bills filed. 6 of those are voting rights bills. In my opinion, they all make it easier to vote. In that case, they will not make it to committee, that would most likely. So that doesn't mean you still don't file good bills. I think people need to be mindful that there are a lot of different ways that we can encourage people to vote. Register to vote, no excuse absentee voting, early voting. I have a bill that I just filed that would encourage landlords and real estate professionals to hand out a voter registration information when they sell or rent or lease an apartment. So just ways that we can beef up people in the process, the democratic process. And because those bills will likely never be referred to committee, what I end up doing, and what was already referenced in the introduction, is I just fight so that the 3 initiative petition bills that are moving through hopefully will not make it through and cross the finish line. So very concerned about obviously those bills and also concerned about bills. There are some that are wanting to move municipal elections and school board elections to November. And I know that school boards are against that, elected officials are against that in municipalities. I just heard a comment in a legislative forum that those will likely not pass this session, but they will be back. So what you have is a long ballot. It politicizes those races that people don't want politicized. So I end up using, it's not my own legislation, but I just fight against voting rights legislation that I feel like erodes democracy. So that's what I spend the rest of my time doing. And it's a full-time job. And I'll just mention I'm running for Congress in the 2nd Congressional District. I do that on the side. So I'm happy to stick around and answer questions at the end.
Sounds great. Thank you very much, Representative Gunby. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Deborah, would you like to check to see if Representative Schwadren is here and is ready to speak? He may have had to run to committee. I'm not sure. Representative Schwadren, are you here and ready to come on? Okay, let's go with Representative Dogan is here.
Hey, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, let's let Deborah give you an introduction. Thank you
Yes,
for being with us.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Representative Shama Dogan. It's nice to see you. Appreciate you being here. Representative Dogan is a Republican who represents a portion of southwestern St. Louis County, including Baldwin and Fenton. He first joined the House in 2014 and is completing his 4th term. His legislative agenda has focused on education, ethics, and criminal justice reform. Prior to joining the House, he served as an alderman in the city of Baldwin. Representative Dogan chairs the Special Committee on Criminal Justice Reform. We send our gratitude and thank you, Representative Dogan, for your ongoing work to improve our criminal justice system, to reform police practices, and for your willingness to work in a bipartisan fashion to pass common sense legislation. Thank you again, and I'll turn it over to you, Representative.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Thank you, Cheryl. Thanks to everybody on the call for joining us and taking a little time out of your evening to listen to us. We just finished up our session. We were in late for the House. We are not used to late nights, and I understand we might have a couple more of those this week because we're just trying to get in as much work as possible before we go off to spring break next week. And so some of my priorities this year, this is my last term, my last go round. Time really flies, but one of the pieces of legislation that's been moving in the process and that I did appreciate having JCRC testify in favor of is the Crown Act bill. And Crown stands for Creating a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair. And this pertains to hair discrimination, predominantly against African-American children in our public schools, but it could be any children, including Jewish children, who would be discriminated against in a classroom by a teacher or in an athletics competition, like we saw a couple of years ago in New Jersey, where you had the young wrestler named Drew Jones, who was forced to cut his dreadlocks to participate in a wrestling tournament, which was humiliating, which was unnecessary, and which was just blatantly racially discriminatory. And so this bill ensures that that will not happen to any other kids here in the state of Missouri. There are about 20 states that have already passed legislation like this. And it's something that's really been coming to the forefront the last few years because of that example and because of a documentary. Well, it wasn't a documentary, but it was a short film called Hair Love that was really aimed at kids and their parents, just teaching them to love their natural hair. And it depicts a father and his struggles with dealing with his daughter's hair, which I've had to go through myself since I don't really do anything with my own hair these days, haven't for years. I always, joke about and kind of feel uncomfortable with, but end up having to do my daughter's hair here and there. And so that bill is one that we've passed out of committee. It's currently on the calendar. We are going to pass it and send it to the Senate probably this week. So I'm really looking forward to that, and been grateful to have the sponsorship and co-sponsorship of several of my colleagues in the Legislative Black Caucus as well. Another bill that we are really hopeful that we can do something on is HB 2412, which is a bill I have regarding restitution for people who are found innocent in the state of Missouri. As many of you may remember, when Kevin Strickland was released from prison last year, we found out, and Kevin had to find out the hard way, that the state of Missouri, if you are wrongfully convicted but then released, does not provide for any compensation except for in cases where people were exonerated based on DNA evidence. And in Kevin's case, that was not the case. And we have a lot of other individuals who may be in Kevin's circumstances, thanks to Senate Bill 53 and 60, which we passed last year, which gives prosecutors the ability to go back and do the right thing in cases of wrongful conviction. And so right now, again, those people, unless they were exonerated based on DNA evidence, they get nothing from the state of Missouri. And so this bill, which also Representative Ron Hicks from St. Charles has a counterpart version, will give those exonerees some compensation from the state. And then we've also got some language on that bill that will help give them access to some of the services that people who are parolees, and we treat parolees better than we treat exonerees right now in the state of Missouri, which was the biggest part of the impetus for us to introduce this bill. But people who are on parole who, admit their guilt are given, access to resources like educational benefits, like health benefits, like reentry services that are not given to exonerees currently. And so this really just matches up those services for exonerees that they're not receiving right now. Another piece of legislation that I have that is in committee, we just had a hearing on it last week and we're going to vote it out of committee tomorrow, is HB 1741, which allows women to access contraception more easily, specifically oral contraception, birth control pills, which are safe, effective, and help to reduce unplanned and unwanted pregnancies. And we've passed that bill out of the House previously a couple different times with the leadership of Representative Sheila Solon, a good friend of mine, but she termed out last term. And so I am giving that bill a go and hoping that we can get that a little further. That bill has always gotten hung up in the Senate by some of the senators that are causing all of the ruckus over there right now. So I anticipate the same thing will probably happen this year, but we would at least like to get it out of the House and show that there's some consensus in the House to support increased access to contraception. And then last but not least, piece of legislation that I filed actually in conjunction with Representative Gunby, 2797, which provides a pilot program for fentanyl test strips. And that's something that we've worked on a bipartisan basis. We are hoping to get some funding in the budget for those fentanyl test strips because they can help save lives. Point blank, they help save lives for people who are addicted to drugs and who simply want to be able to test whatever drugs that they're using to see if it has fentanyl in it. And other states that have passed pilot programs like this, they've shown that they help to reduce the incidence of overdoses, fatal overdoses. They help to promote more responsible behaviors. So the people that get these test strips will very often either have Narcan present just in case they do overdose, they'll use with a friend present, or they will just choose not to use the drugs in the first place, which would be the ideal outcome. So those are some of the things I've been working on, and I'm happy to take any questions if folks have any.
Thank you so much, Representative Dogan. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Cheryl, I'm going to defer to you again.
Well, I know Representative Mackey is on.
Okay.
And so why don't we go ahead and have him make his remarks. And then at that point, I think we'll bring our legislators on together and see what kind of questions we have for them.
Fantastic. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you for being here, Representative Ian Mackey. Representative Mackey is a Democrat and represents a portion of central St. Louis County. He joined the House in 2019 and is serving his second term. Representative Mackey is an attorney and a former teacher who was raised in the Missouri Ozarks. Representative Mackey is an advocate for education and supporting children. We thank him for standing up against efforts to limit what can be taught in our K-12 classrooms. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Representative. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to be here this evening. Hello, everybody. I've got two pieces of good news and two pieces of, I guess, bad news, or two things I'm working on, two things I'm fighting. So I'm going to do the good stuff first. From my perspective, I for the last several years have teamed up with a colleague of mine on the other side of the aisle named Donnie Bailey, who's a Republican from Eureka, and she and I have just become a great team tackling a number of issues in our education system, particularly relating to the treatment of kids, specifically our youngest kids in our K-12 schools. Last year, we were able to severely limit the use of seclusion and restraint in our K-12 schools, which was something we worked on for a few years. And this year we are taking a look at ending K-3 suspensions. So not suspending out of school suspensions for children who are in grades kindergarten through third grade. This is something that the City of St. Louis Public Schools has been doing since 2016. The Kansas City Public School System this year voted to ban suspensions of students in grades kindergarten through fifth grade. So 2 of our top 10 largest school districts have decided that this is good policy, and it's been good policy in St. Louis for several years and worked fine. This is something we need to take statewide. We had a hearing last week that went well, that had no opposition, no testimony in person to oppose the bill. We do have some hesitancy from members of the legislature, particularly on the majority party, that we are working with to come to some consensus and create some sort of an agreement that we might all be able to vote on. We may not, it sounds like this week, this may not be the year we completely abolish K-3 suspensions, but it sounds like we may be on a path to severely limiting them, restricting them, and creating some more transparency when they take place, requiring that IEP teams and that administrators and that social and emotional support personnel and counselors form a team or are part of a discussion anytime a child who is in our youngest grades is faced with an out-of-school suspension. So that is priority number 1. Also working on a piece that is in, I don't know if this has been talked about yet or not, but we have a, tomorrow morning, a bill is being heard that is called our Cannabis Freedom Act, I think is what it's called. It's a large omnibus piece of legislation, essentially to legalize recreational marijuana with a number of other various parameters. So folks may know that there's an initiative petition underway already to put this on the ballot. It's well on its way to gathering the required signatures to go on the ballot. All polling indicates that if it's on the ballot, it's probably going to pass. We're looking at joining a number of other states that have legalized recreational marijuana. The thinking is, as legislators, we may have specific ways we want to do it before we just go willy-nilly and take it to the ballot. We got a lot to flesh out in the bill. It's not perfect. There's a lot of moving parts to it. One of the moving parts is my legislation to prevent police officers from using the smell of marijuana as justifiable, as reasonable cause for a warrantless search. So specifically with a motor vehicle. So, a police officer pulls somebody over for speeding or for broken taillight. The driver rolls down the window. The police officer smells marijuana. That should not be justifiable. That should not be reasonable cause for a warrantless search. And Illinois was the first state recently to pass this legislation. And I think we'll probably see a trend in other states as we move closer to recreational use, and particularly with medical use now legal in Missouri. If somebody may already be in possession of that marijuana legally, they may already have a medical marijuana permit, but during the course of that search, maybe something else comes about that is illegal and leads to somebody's life being thrust into chaos The law states that the fruit from the poisonous tree is no good, and stopping somebody or searching them or detaining them or arresting them for something that is legal, and then discovering something illegal after that is something that the law, for as long as I've been aware of it, has said something that cannot occur and should not occur for obvious reasons. So strengthening our Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure, and trying to align our statutes to be less punitive toward marijuana use, which is something that I think several states, ours included, that's a direction we're heading. The things we're stopping and working on, from my perspective, the legislation that tries to go into our classrooms and tell teachers what they can and cannot teach, specifically as it relates to racism, as it relates to the history of our country, as it relates to the treatment of marginalized groups of people, including Jewish people. These are things that we want to teach our kids. These are things that kids want to learn. And we've seen, gosh, I don't know, dozens and dozens and dozens of bills from various different perspectives try to get at changing this and try to get at restraining this. And I know several of you, I see Cheryl down here all the time working on this stuff, and a lot of folks, I'm sure, who are also on the call down here advocating. And let me just tell you, this is the good news. It has had such a tremendous effect. The first hearing that we had on January 11th, we had record number of opposition testimony submitted online. We had 944 Missourians weigh in online and say they were against this legislation. And we had dozens and dozens of people in person offering their testimony in 2 and 3 minute increments. And because of that, the legislation that we now are cobbling together and putting toward a vote on the floor, we being the majority party, is severely watered down in a good way. It does not, at this point, ban specific curriculum. It does not list specific books that you can't read, all of which were a part of our initial discussions. It now has sort of vague language that is still poses a deep chilling effect on the classroom, and something certainly that should be opposed. But because of the mass resistance that was put towards these bills in the beginning, that had a substantial effect in weakening this legislation. So kudos seriously to everybody who got involved in that early on, and has especially been coming to the Capitol in person to testify. I commend that to every single person on this call. It's a commitment, it's a drive, it's waiting around. You only get to talk for 2 or 3 minutes. But when you share your story with legislators, not data, not specifics, not stats, not an article that you read that you want everybody to read, but your story. When you tell them who you are, what you do for a living, how this bill affects you, how it affects your kids and your grandkids, how it affects your community, that changes hearts and minds over the long term, and in the immediate, it gives folks pause. It causes folks to stop and listen. And I know those of you who've done it have seen this effect. And so I certainly commend that to all of you who haven't done it. Talk to the folks who have. It's intimidating at first. It was for me before I was a legislator and I did it. I remember being, not knowing what to expect. It's a brand new experience. But I don't know anybody who's done it and then not done it a million times after that, because you see the effects. So I hope folks will do that. The other piece of legislation that is number one on my stop list is a bill that's being heard actually right now as we speak in the General Laws Committee to prevent children who are transgender from playing sports, pretty much plain and simple. And I'm sure folks have seen this in national news. This is a new target group, a marginalized community that is, under the microscope at this particular moment in our history, and a number of folks who don't understand sports, who don't understand women, who don't understand transgender children, have a lot of ideas about how to regulate their existence, and really just incredibly harmful and detrimental legislation. So I'm going to be tuning into that hearing when we wrap this up, and I hope that, as in years past, we're able to stop that this year as well. So that's what I'm working on.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Representative Mackey. Appreciate all of your time and your feedback and all of your hard work. Next, we're going to have, are we ready with Senator Schupp? Sorry, go ahead, Cheryl.
Yes, Senator Schupp is here, and Representative Schwadren is back, and he has just left the General Laws Committee, and Senator Schupp is in session and has popped out. So they both are going to be very time limited, but why don't we start with Senator Schupp and then move on to Representative Schwadren. Hopefully he can stay with us.
Sounds good, Cheryl. Thank you. I'm going to do just a quick introduction. Welcome back. Our friend Senator Jill Schupp is a Democrat who represents a portion of central St. Louis County. Senator Schupp took office in the Senate in 2014. She has a long career of public service, including serving on the Ladue School Board, the Creve Coeur City Council, and for 6 years in the Missouri House of Representatives. Senator Schupp is the only Jewish member of the Senate. We thank Senator Schupp for your tireless work to support so many of the priorities of the JCRC and for standing up against many bills that would harm the most vulnerable and disenfranchised in our state. Thank you, Senator Schupp. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Deborah. It's so good to see you and to see Cheryl, to see you and so many of you who are my friends. It is great to get together, even if it's just through Zoom. So I am in the middle of session. I've been on the floor, which is why I haven't been here debating a utilities bill. And I am going to be heading back to the floor. We're going to be going on maybe long into the evening tonight. So forgive me, I'm going to limit it to a couple of bills that I want to talk about. But I also want to say that I was just here for Representative Mackey's discussion. Those bills he is supporting and fighting, we are on the same side of those issues. And I'm really proud of the people over on the House side who are moving more quickly than we seem to be on the Senate side. They are fighting the good fight. And so many of you, I think I see Cheryl here every week, as well as Rory and so many other people who come and make your voice heard. So you are very much appreciated, as you heard from Representative Mackey. The two bills I'm going to talk about, one is, and if you've already heard this, then I'm going to just move on to the other, but a bill that I'm going to be working hard against as it moves through the Senate is the initiative petition reform. Did you already discuss that tonight?
Go ahead.
No, you did not. So let me just tell you that right now, for the people of the state of Missouri to get a petition on the ballot. So this is how we got Medicaid expansion passed. This is how we got medical marijuana passed. This is how we stopped the right to work legislation. This is years ago how we got the issue of, oh my gosh, I can't think of the name, the dogs, the puppy bills passed. So right now we have 8 congressional districts. We have to get a certain amount of signatures in 6 of them, and then something can be put on the ballot. It can be a constitutional amendment, and it requires 50% of the vote plus 1. Some of these bills that are coming forward would require signatures in each of the 8 congressional districts, a larger number of signatures, making it really hard, and then a higher tally, a higher vote than 50% plus 1 to get an initiative petition passed. What this does is has a chilling effect on people like all of you who want to petition your government, who want to make change and don't see the legislature doing what you want us to do. So what will end up happening, some of my colleagues and I have been talking about, only the very, very wealthy, the people who can afford lobbyists and who can afford to come down here, hire people to get those signatures for the ballot. It's those people who have a greater amount of influence than maybe the rest of us who are trying to do our best to live our lives and support the causes we care about. They're going to have additional undue influence in Jefferson City, and people like you and me that want to sign on to something like making sure our low income friends and neighbors have access to the health care they need. Those are the kinds of things that are going to get stopped should this initiative petition, should one of these many bills that have been filed go forward. That is something that is of great concern to me. It will have ramifications for the long term, and we need to do everything we can as those bills move through the process to stop them. I want to tell you about and I'm talking so fast because I need to head back down, but I want to tell you about a bipartisan bill that I am working hard. Senator Elaine Gannon and I, she is a Republican from Jefferson County, and she and I both have the same bill that we are working hard. We share the bill numbers now. We spoke about the bill in committee and testified, and we are trying to make sure that every mom who is low income, who gives birth, every mom who is on Medicaid, who currently gets 60 days of health care after she gives birth, we want to expand that to a year. We have one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the country. We rank 44. Our moms die unnecessarily many times because they can't get access to health care including mental health. And you know, very few things that have long-term consequences like mental health or high blood pressure, diseases like that need more than 60 days of care through a doctor. So we want to make sure we are helping save the lives of the mother, who can then bond with her newborn child, help take care and be part of her family, and really do a good job for people in their family. Those moms who go back to work can go back healthy, knowing that if they need something, they can get the care they need. Now, this bill came to the floor in the Senate. We are very excited about it. One of our Republican colleagues kind of put a poison pill on the bill, or is trying to, by adding an amendment that would actually defund Planned Parenthood. And as many of you know, Planned Parenthood, people think of it as the place to go to get an abortion. Planned Parenthood serves 90% of Planned Parenthood's work across this country is providing other kinds of services. Breast cancer screenings, cervical screenings. They provide birth control especially for low-income people. They provide sexually transmitted illness cures, medicine for men and women, and they identify them. So they are working hard to provide all kinds of services for people across the state. So when this poison pill got added to this bill, or is being attempted to be added to this bill in the Senate that does good for low-income families, it sort of shut things down, and the bill has been laid over, and we'll see where we go from here. But if any of you advocate and want to reach out and let people know that you care about the underlying bill here that provides a year's worth of health care for our moms who make the choice to actually have their babies, but may need some help with their medication and their visits to the doctor, I'd ask you to step up and advocate on behalf of, and now I'm looking for my bill number, 639, the postpartum coverage bill. I'm so sorry, but I have people waiting for me on the floor. They're holding the floor for me. I'm so glad to see you all. I'm sorry I couldn't spend more time with you. Take good care. Well,
Thank you for your generosity with your time.
absolutely.
For your work.
See you tomorrow, Jill.
Okay.
All right, are we ready with Representative Schwadren?
We are.
Okay, Representative Schwadron is a Republican who represents a portion of the city of St. Charles. He is completing his first term in the Missouri House. He is a St. Louis County native. He is the only Jewish member of the Missouri House of Representatives. We thank Representative Schwadron for introducing a Holocaust education bill this session and for his leadership in standing up against anti-Semitism on the floor of the Missouri House. Welcome, Representative Schwadron.
Thank you for having me. And yeah, I like the senator, I am very short on time. I should be in committee right now hearing the bills that Representative Mackey was highlighting. So I will be very quick with the information that I have. As was mentioned, the one bill, Holocaust Education Week, is House Bill 2000. That was actually just brought up on the floor this evening, and we agreed to the title and then laid it over. That is a simple procedural move, so that way no amendments can be added to it. So I had filed an amendment because unfortunately in committee, the point of the bill is to require schools to develop a curriculum to teach the Holocaust during the second week of April. And so unfortunately, someone wanted to change that shall teach to a may teach and make it optional. However, the amendment that I will be doing on the floor will change that back to a shall. And there's a few other things in there. There's the Holocaust Education Awareness Commission. They can get the materials from them. They can get it from the United States Holocaust Museum and Memorial. And in this amendment, we're also adding in the St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum as a source of educational materials. So that way, when schools are teaching this, they're not getting fictional materials such as the boy in the striped pajamas or other possible false information when it comes to teaching the Holocaust. So that's the biggest bill right there. And then also share a bit of news. I was just called into the budget chair's office. You may have heard that the governor had a 0 line item for the Holocaust Education Awareness Commission. In speaking with the budget chair, he is deciding to restore that funding request. All they asked for was $32,000 out of a $47 billion budget. So I'm happy to announce that just to happen this evening. And so hopefully the Senate will keep that. I'm sure Senator Schupp will make sure that stays in there. And then another bill of mine that is moving along in the process is, I'm calling it the Porch Piracy Bill. This bill, if you ever had a package delivered and you got notification that it was delivered and then it wasn't there on your porch because someone decided to take the opportunity to steal it off your porch, this is going to increase the penalties for those people. And so the first penalty for this bill would be a Class A misdemeanor, which is punishable by up to 1 year in jail and up to $1,000 or $2,000 fine, excuse me. And then any subsequent offense would be a Class E felony. So there you could end up seeing prison time. And the reason for that is we have the stiffer penalty, which is still up to a judge's discretion, whether he or she wants to implement the full measure of that penalty. And studies have shown that that can actually reduce recidivism rates. So someone gets caught stealing packages, they now have an opportunity to show remorse and go on the straight and narrow with that. And that bill should be coming up on the floor for perfection on Wednesday. I do have many other bills. Some of them are specific to St. Charles, such as our judicial circuit, and also something very close to where I live in St. Charles is preventing waste transfer stations from being put in near residential properties within 1,000 feet. So I don't have anything blockbuster that I'm sponsoring, I would say, except obviously the Holocaust Education Week. But it's been a great experience thus far in my first term and looking forward to returning next year as well.
Deborah, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Representative, for being here, and thank you for your work and for sharing that exciting information about that funding being restored. Appreciate you taking time, even though we know you're very busy. So hope to connect with you again soon.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And if anyone wants to get a hold of me, like I said, I got to get back down to committee for this hearing. I have an open door policy. Please call me, contact me. I pride myself on returning as much communication as possible. Of course, I give priority to the people that are constituents of mine, but if you mention that you were on the Zoom call, I will definitely put you up on top of that priority list.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Representative Schwadron. I know you're going to have a long, late night, so we appreciate you stepping in. Thank you.
Yes, I'm putting the over under on my getting out of here at about 11:30.
Okay. Well, that means Rory gets home about 2 o'clock in the morning. So,
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
All right, we'd now like to bring back all legislators that are still here with us to address any questions that you may have and also to share advice, again, on being effective advocates. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and you can also just unmute yourself and raise your hand, and Cheryl will call on you.
Got one more to add here. There we go. We have 3 representatives left. So I think both of our senators are gone. And yeah, so this is our group. And I am gonna add myself here. So techie. Okay, so thank you guys for staying with us. It's been amazing that we actually got out of session and we're able to have you all join us. Some of you have addressed this a little bit in your own remarks, but I guess what we really want to know is how can we as citizen advocates help you? What's the best way for us to help you? So I'll start with that, and then anybody else who wants to jump in on specific bills or anything else, please unmute yourself and jump in. Anyone who, any of you can go. Go ahead.
Sure, I won't take too much time reiterating sort of what I was talking about in my remarks, but you know, I know Cheryl would be more than willing and happy to help people who want to come testify and want to see what that's like, or who maybe just want to visit for the first time, you know, attend a hearing, sit in the space, learn the layout of the Capitol, see what a hearing is like. Every committee is different. Every committee chair is different. Chairs hold discretion in how they run their committee and how long they let people testify. But if you've not done it before and there's just a little inkling of thinking about doing it, reach out to Cheryl and ask her about it. Because what I find to be the most helpful, both in supporting legislation and in working to stop legislation, is showing the commitment. When you come to the Capitol and take basically the entire day, which is usually what it ends up being, it really sends the message of how important this is, of how important whatever subject matter that is. And when people do it in large numbers, it sends the message that this is not just, something that somebody saw on the news one night and said, oh, well, here's my opinion. Or they just, read an article and said, oh, well, that's terrible. Or, oh, that's great. This shows that somebody's been tracking something, following it, knows when it's being discussed, and has something to say about it. So definitely, that's from my perspective, that's by and away the biggest way to impact legislation as somebody who's not a legislator.
I would just add, I'd echo what Ian's saying, and one of the good things that came out of COVID is we have online testimony forms now. So you used to have to make that trek, and you could email or call your representative or senator, but there's online testimony now, so you can submit those for a bunch of different legislation. And I know personally, I read those. I mean, I go through there, and it just really personalizes each piece of legislation. I mean, there's a lot of lobbyists and groups that come through and support or oppose legislation, but it enables those of us who can't be in committee or go back and look at the archive testimony to really read and understand personal stories. And as Representative Mackey was saying earlier, those personal stories, that's what we remember. You don't remember, XYZ lobbying group was in support or opposed to this legislation. You remember this individual, and I use the example when we were doing initiative petition debate. I read what those individuals had written online, and people who talked about, you could visualize standing out in the cold talking to conservatives and progressives about various legislation. I mean, it really kind of brought it to life. So if you can't make the trek here, definitely go online and submit your testimony that way.
Yeah, and I would just piggyback on what Representative Mackey said, just about the importance of people telling their stories and sharing their stories. We had a really powerful piece of testimony today in the Health and Mental Health Committee on a bill I was presenting about sickle cell disease. And we had a couple of people, one of them actually had sickle cell disease, was a gentleman who's above the age of 50, and the life expectancy for that disease is about 50. So he's really, been blessed to live as long as he has. And he told his story and talked about how he had two siblings, his younger brothers, both have already passed away, long passed away from the disease. And you could just see that really touched the committee, being able to see someone describe the pain that disease caused. And so whatever legislation it is, hearing from Missourians, telling their stories and talking to us about how the bills that we write will affect them, it's a lot more meaningful, at least to me, and I think to a lot of my colleagues, hearing that kind of testimony from an average citizen who's taken the time to come up here, whether it's, a couple hours, or even if it's someone from Columbia coming down, taking 30 minutes, than it is to hear from some contract lobbyist. No offense to contract lobbyists, but
I have one question in the chat, or several, but this one is for Representative Dogen. What are you doing with your what are you doing with the Republican Party to slow down and or stop the extreme anti-trans bills that continue to be proposed?
Well, I think that's something Representative Schwadren and I have been on the same side of. And, it's just, since we cannot testify from the perspective of someone who happens to be trans or someone who has children who are, I think the appeal really to understanding what it's like to be different, what it's like to be an outsider, That's something that I've spoken to my colleagues about, both on the House floor, when one of those bills came to the House floor, as well as in private. And kind of on the positive side of that, I have been pushing for the Missouri Non-Discrimination Act. This year, I actually sponsored that legislation in memory of my good friend, Tom Hannigan, who passed away in October. And one of the things that happened with his memorial ceremony, never forget this, his partner, Scott Mell, every single one of the legislators who came up to offer their condolences to Scott, and they said, what can we do? What can we do to help? We're here to help. And Scott said, pass Mona. that was what Tom would have wanted. And, that's exactly what myself, Ian, all kinds of other folks have been working on this year, is just trying to build a coalition to try and get our colleagues to move on that issue and to move their hearts and minds on the bills that they have been sponsoring that, are going to be harmful to the LGBT community. So it's a lot of work. It's, it's a matter of changing people who have been, not used to dealing with these issues. I don't think there are a whole lot of LGBT people in some of these rural areas that these folks represent. So there's a lot of education that just needs to be done on what the issues that folks in those communities face. And I think that helps to go a long way, is just putting a face to these issues and letting them know that there's real people who are affected by these bills that they're trying to pass.
Thank you, and thank you for standing up for those who can't always speak for themselves. There is a question from Adina Raskus with the American Jewish Committee about the question about the contraception bill. Adina, do you want to step on and say what your question is?
Sure, I unmuted, right?
Yes, you're good.
How does your contraception bill, how is that going to deal with companies that feel that it's against their religion to even think about letting any of their employees use contraception? Is that bill going to have anything to do with any of these companies?
So let me say, Adina, that was Jill's bill in the Senate. And so these representatives may not have the answer to that.
Okay.
But I can relate that to Jill. And if you do have the answer, go ahead. But if you don't, it was Senator Schupp's bill.
So I can't speak to Senator Schupp's bill, but I have a separate bill on contraceptive access. It does not address that issue particularly. And my bill really just has women to be able to not go to their doctor directly. They can get access to birth control through their pharmacist. It doesn't touch on the insurance part though. Or on the pharmacist part, where frankly, we have a law in Missouri that says that if a pharmacist individually doesn't feel comfortable dispensing birth control, another pharmacist in their department can do it. And so I understand that's a barrier to access in a lot of rural communities. And I would like for that not to be the case, but that's kind of where we are in Missouri.
Thank you.
Thank you.
More questions for our legislative panel? Looking through the chat here, just double checking. Rabbi Carlos Senker has asked about voting rights legislation. Do we think there is any chance of getting any kind of voting rights bills that actually do expand absentee voting or mail-in voting, or making it easier to get, making it easier for people to vote? I think I know the answer, but ask the question.
None of my bills have been referred to committee. So I've got 6 of them. Just waiting.
What I will say, and others can comment on this, several of the bills that have been proposed do in fact make no excuse absentee voting available, and they do provide some concessions, but they come with so many other pieces to them that we're not necessarily, we the JCRC and our voting rights policies are not advocating for them, because they have so much restriction in them that even though they do provide some good things, it's not a strong enough package to be able to say we would support it. A question has come through from Nancy Solomon Deloge. If we can't get bills through to make it easier for voters to cast their ballots, what can we do to prevent it from becoming harder?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, and yeah, Cheryl, you're spot on about, the little small little bits and pieces of these bills that expand access, and then the 90% of them that restrict it. Dean Plocker is the floor leader in the House. He's one of the top two guys that decides our agenda. He decides what's on the floor, what we're going to debate. He decides a lot in the House, and he's a representative from St. Louis County. I don't know if, I'm sure there's probably folks on this call maybe who live in his district. I know there's folks who live very near his district. If he is your state representative, just be relentless, especially if you live in his district. He's worth reaching out to from everybody on the call, but especially if you are his constituent. Of course, be kind and respectful, and that's how everybody gets everything they want, and of course it's just the way to be. But still be relentless. Check in regularly, check in frequently, talk to him, tell him you're his constituent, and tell him why you oppose limiting voters' access to the ballot. And don't make it, like I said, don't make it, the same reasons that Rachel Maddow gives us. Make it your reason. Talk about your experience. Talk about how your experience in voting, what it was like, what went well, what didn't go well, how easy it was or how hard it was. I think our St. Louis County officials have just done really the most amazing job through this pandemic of letting folks, now that you can vote in any polling place in St. Louis County, now that we print our ballots on the spot. They've made it easy to apply. The states come right in and try to make it hard, but they did everything they could. Of course, a bipartisan commission, 50-50, Republican director and Democratic director, making it as easy as possible for folks to vote. And I think we have to tell our story as St. Louis County. We have to say that this isn't partisan. This isn't a partisan issue. We've got Republicans and Democrats in St. Louis County who've come together and said it's got to be as easy as possible to vote. And here's how we've done it. We use paper ballots. Bust that myth. Folks want to talk about machines and being hacked and Russians. Come on, we don't do that in St. Louis County. We use paper ballots. Let them know that. Let them know that we're a county of 1 million people. We use paper ballots and we make it easy to vote. We've got to tell our story as St. Louis County and to the rest of the state, and dispel some of these myths that are out there.
And I would anybody can go tour the county election board if you'd like. You just contact either Rick Stream or Eric Fay, and they will take you on a tour. And I mean, the stuff that they have done in a very short, literally in the last 2 or 3 years, it's kind of revolutionized just the behind the scenes. And they're doing a lot of great work promoting their brand, so to speak. And really worldwide, there are very few people who administer elections. That group at the county level, at the state level, and worldwide is not very large. And so they know the ins and the outs. I know Eric Fay travels around the world to monitor elections in other countries. And so I think when people realize when ballots are being counted, it's bipartisan, all of those things, the chance for fraud or error is so very slim. And so they are more than happy to have conversations with you and allow you to tour the facility.
Yeah, we did a bipartisan tour of the St. Louis County Election Board over the interim, and a lot of us came, including some of the Republicans who had a lot of these kinds of questions from, I think, maybe from places they found online that were saying, oh, well, did they count the ballots with people watching them? And, just walking through every step of the process. And it was very helpful to have both Eric Fay and then Rick Stream, the Republicans elections director, on the same page, telling these folks, no, that's not how we do it here in St. Louis County. Everything we do is on the up and up. The counting is done and it's all very transparent, and it's all done with one official from each party, representatives of each party there. And just walking through, all these different questions people had about quote unquote election integrity. And I think it's important also to point out that there was just a poll done this weekend, actually, statewide poll. I think 80% of Missourians said that they do have confidence in our elections here in Missouri. So they believe there already is voter integrity. There already is election integrity, because you don't see a whole lot of politicians anywhere questioning the validity of their own elections if they won, right? Nobody wants to say, yeah, there's voter fraud and it elected me. It's always somebody else who wins because of voter fraud, oddly enough. So I think just being able to tell that story of St. Louis County and the fact that we've won national award for election administration in this past cycle, that's something we can be proud of, and a story we need to share. And I think the fact that those two were able to talk to legislators about these proposals to move our school board elections and all of our municipal elections to November, and they were able to walk us through it and say, this will not work in St. Louis County. Our machines do not have the ability to deal with a ballot that long. And I know Representative Plocker has come out publicly and said he does not support that legislation because he knows it would not work in St. Louis County and probably wouldn't work in other places in the state as well.
Thank you all. This is one that we continuously are advocating on, and so you've given us some great new talking points. I'm going to go ahead and say thank you and turn this back over to Deborah to close us out this evening. We know it's been a long night for you, and we just can't thank you enough for spending some of your time with us this evening. Deborah?
Absolutely. Thank you, Cheryl. And thank you once again to all of our legislators for spending some time with us this evening. And thanks to all of you for attending. The next and last meeting on the council for this year will be on Monday, May 9th. Everyone have a nice evening.
And before you head off, if you're still on, you're getting our advocacy alerts. I know you are, so this hopefully inspires you to take some action.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you, Deborah. Cheryl.